Welcome to Kevin Deal Photography, where I take you on my journey through photography. On today's episode, we're going to be doing an in-depth review of the 16mm 1.8 lens from Viltrox. Welcome to today's episode. If you're not familiar with Kevin Deal Photography, we do gear reviews, tips, techniques, and tutorials, and sometimes we dive into film. If any of that sounds appealing to you, click the subscribe button below. For all of you who are back to Kevin Deal Photography, welcome back. And for all of you where this is your first time here, at the beginning of every episode, I ask for donations to BIG, which is an organization that helps intellectually disabled adults adapt to jobs in the real world. But to the subject of today's episode, for the regulars on my channel, you've probably sat through several of my Viltrox reviews over the years, but those reviews were a bit different from what we're covering today. All of them were for the Fuji X mount, which is an APS-C system. I've honestly lost count of how many Viltrox lenses I reviewed for Fuji, but one thing that always stood out, whether it was the more entry-level Air series or the gorgeous Pro series, Viltrox lenses consistently punched well above their weight class. As someone who reviews gear on YouTube, though, I enjoy learning about different camera systems. Last year, I decided to step up my hybrid camera game and dove into the Lumix full-frame ecosystem. The system quickly won me over with its video-friendly features, and my two S9 bodies now handle most of the video content on this channel. In fact, the camera I'm using to record myself right now is an S9. That said, I do have one complaint about the Lumix platform: the pricing landscape for lenses. When you look at first-party Lumix lenses and third-party options from companies like Sigma, they tend to sit roughly at the same price range. They're often competing directly with one another. On the other end of the spectrum, we're starting to see companies like TT Artisan come in with fun, very budget-friendly options. I reviewed their 40mm f2 on this channel, but what I've always felt the Lumix system lacks compared to something like Fuji is a third-party lens lineup that offers excellent build quality and performance at roughly half the price of first-party mid to upper tier glass. Well, we finally might be getting that. Viltrox has officially joined the L-mount alliance, and their first offering is the full-frame 16mm f1.8. It comes in at roughly half the price of its closest first-party competitor, the Lumix 18mm f1.8, which sits around $1,100. This Viltrox lens is under $600. That's exciting to me because in all the testing I did with Viltrox lenses on the Fuji platform, they were consistently knocking on the door of much more expensive first-party options, often at about half the price. If Viltrox can pull that off on the L mount as well, it could be a big deal for people already in the system or for those considering it. A growing platform creates competition. More competition means more options for photographers and filmmakers, and honestly, if this lens succeeds, there really isn't a downside for any of you. But the only way to see if this is a success is to take it out into the real world, which we'll be doing in today's episode. And before we do that, like we do in all episodes, let's first go over the specs. The Viltrox AF 16mm f1.8 is a full-frame autofocus lens for the E, Z, and L mount systems. It has an aperture range of f1.8 to f22. It has an angle of view of 105.6 degrees. It has a minimum focusing distance of 10.6 inches or 27 centimeters. It has an optical design in 15 elements in 12 groups, and it has 9 rounded aperture blades. It has a front filter thread size of 77mm. It has a built-in USB-C port into the lens for firmware updates. This lens features weather sealing with a rubber gasket. Its dimensions are 3.4 by 4.1 inches or 85.2 by 103 millimeters. It comes in at a weight of 1.2 pounds or 550 grams, and it comes in at a street price of $580 US. All right, those specs sound promising on paper, but that doesn't mean we're going to give this lens a free pass. We still have to test it, and that's what we do on this channel. So before we get into the real world test, let's briefly take a look at the lens itself. I'm actually not sure which series this lens belongs to. If you go to their website, they currently categorize their photography lenses into the Lab, Pro, Evo, and Air series. This lens doesn't appear to be officially listed as any part of those. What I can say is that it seems to borrow a few design cues from the Lab series, like the LED readout and the red badge, even though the red badge doesn't say Lab on it. Another difference is the autofocus motor. This uses an STM motor rather than the VCM motor found in the Lab series. I mention all of this because it makes it a little difficult to place exactly where this sits in terms of quality within the Viltrox lineup. Based on the price of around $590, I'm guessing it's probably somewhere around the Pro series. But that's exactly why we have this YouTube channel. So let's take this lens out into the field and see how well it performs in real world shooting environments. And yes, we will be doing a shootout between this lens and the Lumix 18mm f1.8. All right, here is a vlog test. Kind of an interesting thing going on right here. Some panoramic photography. I don't know what's going on. They're all yelling at me. All right, sorry about that. I guess I walked in on a panoramic photography thing for a school or something. So anyway, this is what 16 millimeters gets you. I'm shooting on the S9 right now, so that's pretty cool. It balances fine on a gimbal. I even have a 3-in-1 filter on the front of the Viltrox. So if you're worried about whether or not the Viltrox is going to be too heavy for an S9 in a gimbal situation, I found that wasn't the case at all. I'm using it right now and it seems to be doing just fine. Let's turn the gimbal around as I walk around. I think this is pretty good, in my opinion. For all of you who have the smaller Panasonic bodies, you got nothing to worry about. All right, now here is some gimbal action with my S1R2. I think it did a pretty good job overall for video. That doesn't surprise me too much. I also did a little bit of handheld work with the S1R2, as you can see right here. But let's shoot a little photography and see what the 16mm looks like. I shot in Houston, Oklahoma City, San Antonio, and let's just see what I came up with using this Viltrox with my Lumix. Oh, there is something I do love about shooting an ultra wide. I typically shoot 35 with street photography, but sometimes when you shoot that 16mm, it just spreads everything out. Overall, I was impressed with the punchy contrast, the way it isolated subjects shot wide open, and I thought the color reproduction was beautiful. We've done vlogging, handheld, gimbal video, street photography, portrait photography. I think we've seen enough. Let's go back to my studio and talk about this lens. All right, so I've had the opportunity to use this Viltrox 16mm f1.8 in a variety of scenarios, including photo and video. I do a lot of lens reviews on this channel. I've reviewed a lot of Viltrox lenses on this channel. So I feel like I have enough information to tell you what I like and what I don't like about this lens. Let's start with the areas where I feel like it could have been a little better. While this lens has 2 function buttons, I could only get function 1 to work. I spent time in the menus of both my S1 R2 and S9, and I was unsuccessful in getting function 2 to work at all. Now, this lens just came out, so if you're watching this video a long time after it comes out, there may be a firmware fix for this. So, get the Viltrox app and see if there's a firmware update for it. But I also wouldn't be surprised if this never gets addressed and they never end up giving us the ability to assign anything to the second button on Lumix, and that may be a Lumix limitation. I don't know, but I would imagine that would require a collaboration between Lumix and Viltrox. I hope I'm wrong and this does get fixed in the future, but at the time of this recording, the second button doesn't work, so I'm putting that under the cons. This isn't a con for me, and I'll explain why in a second, but for some of you, you may not like the weight. On a camera like an S9, it's going to be front heavy. On a gimbal, it's not going to be a seamless swap if you have some of the other Lumix first-party lenses. You're going to need to rebalance your gimbal during swaps. Now, I shoot on Canon and I'm used to their gargantuan RF glass where some of the lenses weigh 4 pounds, so the weight does not bother me at all. And I would argue on a more robust body like the S1 R2, it actually balances rather well. But people who are sensitive to weight might want to look at the 18mm f1.8 if it fits their budget. Additionally, it has a 77 front filter thread size, and that's not the same size as the first-party Lumix lenses. These guys have a 67mm filter thread. I get around this by using an H&Y filter that can expand and contract between 67 and 82mm. If I were being really critical, one area where the more expensive Lumix 18mm f1.8 outperformed the Viltrox is the minimum focusing distance. You can see in these examples where I demonstrate the differences between the two lenses. The Lumix can clearly get closer to the subject. Now, is that a really big deal with an ultra-wide lens? Personally, I don't think so. I usually don't reach for an ultra wide and then get extremely close to a subject unless I'm intentionally trying to create some distortion. That said, the Viltrox can't quite focus as close as the first-party Lumix f1.8. So, for those of you who care about that spec, I'll go ahead and put that into the cons column for you for this Viltrox. Another potential con is minor focus breathing on video with the Viltrox. I still personally think it was fine, but some people get super picky about focus breathing. Once again, if you want better performance there, you will need to spend almost twice as much on the 18mm from Lumix, which has pretty much flawless focus breathing. That's really it for the cons. Now let's talk about the pros, of which there were many. It has an aperture ring that can click and declick. While you can reassign the focus ring to control aperture and other controls on first-party Lumix lenses like this 18mm while in autofocus mode, it doesn't feature a click or declick. If you like a tactile feel for photography, you can flip the toggle on this Viltrox and it'll start to click. If you want a smoother aperture transition for video, flip it to declick. Having that choice is great, and on the first-party Lumix 1.8, it's not even an option. On this Viltrox, if you don't want to use the aperture ring, just move it over to the A position and you can control aperture from an assigned dial instead. That's a lot of flexibility and it's significantly more flexible than the first-party Lumix lenses. And even if these were equally priced, this would be an advantage to the Viltrox, but since the Viltrox is almost half the price, this is a significant Pro. So I made a minor case for some that the focus breathing, the very slight focus breathing, was a con. It wasn't a con to me, but it might have been a con for some of you. But when it comes to photography, I find that the autofocus on this is absolutely fine. Check this out right here. I think this is perfectly fine for what I would expect out of autofocus from a first-party lens. So for a third-party lens, I think it's exceptional. The build quality on this is fantastic. I would easily say it has a more premium feel than the Lumix first-party 1.8 lenses. It's rock solid, and the fact that this is weather sealed is just another huge plus. You can see the red rubber gasket here, which works to keep moisture and dust from getting into the lens. I can take this lens into adverse conditions and not worry about it failing on me. I mentioned earlier that the second control button not being assignable was a downside. That said, you can still customize the first button, and the fact that it's there at all is a plus, especially considering the 18mm f1.8, which costs nearly twice as much, doesn't include one. Personally, I like to assign it to my autofocus box size, but you can map it to just about any function your Lumix camera allows. The bright LED readout is just amazing. It's the feature I never knew that I needed. I love having my readout. I love seeing the focus distance displayed as I change my focus point. Now, this lens markets itself for astro, and even though I don't shoot astro often, when I do, I don't like not being able to see my settings well in darkness. Knowing when I'm at infinity focus is kind of nice. This is a feature I now hope to see on more lenses moving forward, and sorry to all of you who are hoping I do an astro test. I did not have the opportunity to drive 100 miles out of Austin where there's no light pollution to shoot astro. In terms of image quality, I didn't really notice much of a difference between this lens and the first-party 18mm 1.8. Want further proof? Check out these two shots. The one on top is the 18mm, the one on the bottom is the 16mm, and when I zoom in on both files, they're both pretty much the same sharpness in the center of the frame. When I go to the outside of the frame, they're also fairly similar. One more sharpness example, when you zoom in on these two files, once again, the Lumix is on the top, the Viltrox is on the bottom. You may make the argument that there's slightly more contrast on that top file, the Lumix file, but it's very close, and remember, $1,100 versus $600. Let's do one more example. We'll zoom in and you can see the one on the bottom. This one definitely has more chromatic aberration. So you're like, that's where the Viltrox falls apart, except this time I flipped them around. The Viltrox is on top and the Lumix is on the bottom. So the Lumix, stop down, performs more poorly than the Viltrox when it comes to chromatic aberration and high contrast situations. So as far as vignetting, you can see this at 1.8, it's definitely there. It clears up around 2.8. It's somewhat soft in the corners at 1.8, but by the time you get to 2.8, it is incredibly sharp. And when you get to f5.6 and f8, it is razor sharp. As far as backlit performance, well, you look at these shots, you be the judge. A lot of people are picky about backlight performance. I really don't care about it. I think this is fine, but it's really up to you. So that tells me that my experience that I had on Fuji is the same that I'm having on Lumix with Viltrox. Viltrox is once again punching above its weight class. This lens is sharp, it's punchy, the color reproduction was fantastic, and because it has a maximum aperture of f1.8, you can still get excellent subject isolation and use it in darker conditions. I found this lens was an absolute joy to use for both photography and videography. If you're on the Lumix L-mount or looking to get into the Lumix L-mount, all the pros I've gone over up to this point should get you very excited because it means that your entry price to get into high quality lenses has just been cut in half by Viltrox. And that brings us to the biggest pro of all, value. Outside of the lens being heavier, not sharing the same 67mm front filter thread size as the Lumix first party glass, and having a slight focus breathe, all things that really only impact videography minimally, there's not a single other comparison between this Viltrox and the Lumix 18mm where I see the Lumix having a clear advantage. They are both pretty close optically. The Viltrox has the click and declick feature, the Viltrox has a programmable button, the Viltrox has a built-in LED screen that tells you your focus distance. The Viltrox has a more robust chassis, it's 2mm wider, which means you can fit more into your shot, and then the Viltrox is half the price. Yes, $10.99 for the Lumix and $5.80 for the Viltrox. Undeniably a better value, period. So, should you buy this? If you're primarily a photographer, the only reason I can come up with for maybe passing on it is if you think it's too front heavy on a smaller body like the S9. On the S1R2, the Viltrox feels like it was made to go on it. The balance is fantastic, and if you're a photographer using one of the larger bodies, I think this purchase is a no-brainer. If you're a videographer, then it's a little bit more complex of a topic. If you already own some of the other first-party 1.8 lenses, already own some of the 67mm filters that you bought for it, you want to do fast gimbal swaps, you don't mind a field of view that's 2mm tighter, and you want a lens with slightly better focus breathing performance, and then of course you don't mind spending $1,100, then I guess you should maybe look into getting the 18mm f1.8 from Lumix. As for me, I'll probably keep the 18mm f1.8 on my S9 for video work since I already own it, and use this 16mm from Viltrox primarily for photography. But that's a bit of a luxury because Viltrox provided me this lens for free for review. If I were starting from scratch, whether for photography or video, I'd personally go with the Viltrox. None of the drawbacks are deal breakers for me, and as I've outlined throughout this video, there are quite a few reasons why I think the Viltrox is the superior lens, and even though everything is more expensive these days, I think the Lumix is just overpriced. My final thoughts on this lens is that it's an incredible value. Now, Viltrox, let's open the gate and let's get some 35, 50, 85, and 135mm lenses on the market for Lumix, preferably from the Lab series. That does it for today's episode. What did you think of my review of this Viltrox 16mm 1.8? Was it fair? Tell me about it in the comments below. Do you still think that this 18mm 1.8 from Lumix is the better value at twice the price? Tell me about that in the comments below. And if you're a fan of this channel, I humbly ask you to click the subscribe button below. And until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.